Hello guys and welcome back to Poser's Full Movie Recaps. Our film today is a supernatural action comedy film about a police detective who perishes at the hands of the one he trusts and comes back to haunt the living dead. This police department is unlike anything else known to the living. They don't chase aliens because this man, even though he looks like an alien, is not an illegal alien. Nope, they are chasing dead people, specifically dead who come back to live with the living humans. Let's find out how this can be. A few days ago, Nick buried a pack of gold pieces in his backyard, and planted an orange tree on top of it. When his beautiful wife named Julia notices the new orange tree, Nick makes some excuses and diverts the conversation to their current financial struggles. Nick worries a lot about their situation, but Julia assures him that she is happy with what they currently have and that he just needs her husband with her. Later, Nick leaves to go to work. He is a police detective in Boston and tells his partner Bobby that he wants to turn in the gold as evidence from their recent bust. Bobby tries to convince Nick to keep it, pointing out that they did not look for the gold and it just falls into their hands. But Nick is adamant due to the conversation he has earlier with Julia, so he wants to do the right thing. The two get interrupted by a colleague, saying that they found the address of Lord Garza, another big-time syndicate. The SWAT team breaks the door and hunts Garza in his lair. When Nick spots the man, he chases him up to the roof of the building and reports to the team that the suspect escaped through the window. Bobby appears and tells Nick that he can't let his partner turn the gold in, so he draws his gun and shoots Nick, who falls to his death. This is not the end for our favorite Canadian. Nick stands up to look around the crime scene when he notices that time stops and his surroundings freeze. He walks outside the warehouse and got sucked by a vortex-like structure in the sky. Suddenly, he finds himself in a chair facing a strict woman named Mildred Proctor. Still confused, he realizes that he is dead and this is Judgment Day. Mildred explains that Nick is lucky because he has skills that they need, so she is giving him a choice to either take his chances with Judgment being a dirty cop, or he can join the RIPD, which stands for Rest in Peace Department. Basically, his job will be the same when he still lives, which is to be a police officer in the afterlife. His mission is to catch the dead people who escape Judgment and live with the humans, to ship them back to where they belong. Nick's sentence is to serve the RIPD for 100 years, and if he agrees to it, Mildred will send him back to Boston, his home turf. Nick quickly accepts the offer, thinking that he can possibly go back to Julia and continue his life. But Mildred explains that she can read his real purpose, and he cannot do what he intends to do, so don't waste this chance. He follows Mildred through the cages and she explains that they are called deados. They look like regular people on Earth, but once popped, the rotten monster inside goes out. She welcomes him to RIPD Boston's office and hands him to Roy, his new partner. Roy was a law officer too when he was alive, and just like Nick, he perished at the hand of his own partner. Roy brings him to a bathroom, where he kicks on the toilet flush to bring them back to the world of the living. He brings Nick to watch his own funeral, but Nick gets sentimental and runs to Julia. He tries to tell her the truth about himself, but his grieving wife doesn't recognize him anymore. Turns out that Roy expects this to happen, and the Nick now looks like an elderly Chinese man, while Roy looks like a hot blonde gorgeous woman. If he tells anyone who he was, it will just sound garbled. It's like the universe's ultimate wisdom, which makes it like their own witness protection program, so the two drives away to start hunting some deados. Roy explains that the rotting dead soul always leaves bad mojo wherever they go, and that's how they follow their trails. When they go inside the building where a deados is located, Roy gives Nick a special bullet clip that can apparently erase the deado's soul into existence. But these soul-erasing bullets should only be used when the dead get out of control, and adds that it can also kill RIPD officers, so he cautions Nick. They follow the trail of the rotten wall leading to a suspected deados, and knock on his door. A man named Stanley lives in the flat, but he denies being one of the dead. The two throw question after question until the man pops off, revealing himself as a rotten deado. Nick tries to cuff him as a normal police officer would do, but Stanley throws the fridge door and accidentally cuff himself into Nick. Stanley rips off his cuff arm and runs while swallowing pieces of gold. The two RIPD officers chase the deado out in the window, while Nick learns that they are actually immortal when he falls out of the building. He beats Stanley with his own arm until he vomits the pieces of gold. The young police recognize the gold as it is similar to the gold pieces that he and Bobby stole before. Stanley attacks him while he is distracted by it. Thankfully, Roy erases the monster in time to save his partner and taunts Nick for his bad performance. In return, the upset Nick throws Roy in front of a bus, which makes his hat float away in the air. This pissed off Roy, who starts to rant until they reach the Boston headquarters. The two turn over the gold fragments as evidence, and Nick tries to convince Roy to investigate further about the gold because the deados they eliminate did everything to protect it. Roy eventually agrees when Nick soothes the man's ego. The next day, the duo goes to Roy's informant Elliot, and Nick starts asking questions to get some valuable information. When he gets nothing, he throws him a piece of gold and leaves. It turns out that Nick hands him the gold because he notices that he is lying, so they follow him after and Elliot surprisingly leads them to Bobby. Elliot hands the gold to Bobby, which finally piques Roy's interest and helps Nick with his investigation. While Nick is shocked, Roy decides to follow Bobby's car which leads them back into Nick's and Julia's house. Bobby is fishing for pieces of information from Julia on Nick's gold whereabouts, and Julia leads him to the orange tree which Bobby quickly digs out of the dirt. Nick witnesses how Julia gets disappointed with him, while Roy demands an explanation for this. The two continue to follow Bobby at the airport who meets with a man, and when Bobby leaves, they ambush the man to question him. It turns out that the man is another Dedos, which is a big fat rotten one. The fat Dedo escapes and starts to rampage into the city, while the two RIPD officer chases him. They are having a hard time catching the monster due to his super strengths, which drag Roy while hanging to a building. Nick eventually manages to get the suitcase of gold, but the Dedo escapes. Back at the station, Mildred scolds them for the Dedo's exposure to the public and his escape. The two are taken to the Eternal Affairs and discover that the gold is part of an incredibly dangerous artifact known as the Staff of Jericho. Mildred explains that if the artifact is used, the vortex that Nick goes through when he died will get reversed, and the dead will start pouring out into the world of the living, meaning the end of the world as they know it. Aside from the possible upcoming disaster, Nick and Roy get suspended due to their recent epic failure. They will be subjected to a hearing that will most likely lead them to get erased. Since their time is numbered, Nick decides to visit Julia one last time and tries to reveal himself to her once again. At first, Julia seems to believe him but in the end, she decides to walk away from Nick. Roy sees all this and advises the man to just let her move on, so she can learn to live without him. They go to a pier to wait the night, but Nick wants to help stop the upcoming apocalypse. Roy agrees to help the man, and the two plan their next move. Nick expresses his opinion on Bobby, that he believes he's a Dedo even though he has no Dedo vibes around him. Roy informs him that there is some artifact that can mask Dedo's negativity, which Nick thinks that it is the charm bracelet that Bobby always wears. Meanwhile, Bobby is making himself busy by meeting with another Dedo in a coffee shop. He hands him another piece of artifact and talks about their plans indicating that it is near completion, which the Dedo is trying to pull for over 3,000 years. The next morning, Bobby gets a call from Julia who tells him that the Chinese guy from the funeral seems to be Nick. Bobby confirms this suspicion when Nick and Roy arrive at his house to arrest him. He lets them take him into the station, which is flooded with newly captured Dedos, including the guy that Bobby met last night. As the clerk starts processing the confiscated items from the Dedos, she finds the artifact that Bobby gave to the man, and throws it into its other half among the bins. Suddenly, the two halves move to each other to complete a sphere, which makes everyone freeze except for the Dedos. The dead start to wreak havoc while they go inside the vault to steal the remaining gold. When the sphere's effect ends, Roy and Nick run to pursue Bobby's group, who escapes to the same toilet that they used to go back to the living world. Bobby calls the fat Dedos informing him that they retrieve all the gold, and the fat monster instructs them to quickly assemble the Staff of Jericho. The RIPD officers rush out to prevent the doom, and they engage in a fight with the dead, old western cowboy style. Suddenly, they notice several vortexes that appear in the sky, and the two drive fast to follow Bobby and his gang of monsters. Bobby sends two Dedos to kidnap Julia and intends to use the woman's blood to activate the staff. On the way to the Commonwealth building, which is the center of it all, the two get blocked by the big fat monster from the airport. They both open fire on the said Dedo, finally erasing him from existence. As the two arrive at the rooftop, Nick witnesses Bobby stabs Julia in her back, which activates the staff as her blood flows through the artifact. Nick instructs Roy to stop the process, while he quickly engages in a fight with his former partner to save his wife. It seems too late because the dead starts pouring from the sky, so Roy quickly tries to dismantle the Staff of Jericho, while Bobby beats Nick with a boulder. Since Roy cannot able to destroy the artifact with his hands, he uses a bullwhip and pulls a truck down into the staff. This distracts Bobby, and Nick is finally able to pull his gun on him and shoot him out of existence. He then quickly runs to Julia, but the woman is losing a lot of blood. Everything froze around them while Julia finally sees Nick in his old appearance. They say goodbye to each other and Nick reminds Julia to move on to live her life. Later, Julia wakes up in the hospital while being checked by a doctor, who turns out to be the living avatar of Mildred. She assures Nick that Julia is going to be alright, so Nick moves on to go back to his job at RIPD, which according to Mildred, the Eternal Affairs lets him off with a warning. She adds that Roy gets another 53 years added to his sentence, and proceeds to give his hat back to appease the enraged man. The movie ends with Nick getting his new identity, which is a young Girl Scout, complete with huge braces. Did you enjoy our film today? Write your comments down below, thank you.